All right, class, let's all settle down for a second. Who's feeling brave enough to go first with their presentation on famous scientists? How about you, Timmy? You're looking like you're ready to drop some knowledge on us.
Yeah, sure. So, Carl Linnaeus was born in Sweden in 1707, and from the start, it was pretty clear this dude was not going to be your typical Swedish kid. While most kids were out doing normal things like, I don't know, learning to fish or just being kids, little Carl was more interested in figuring out why plants were different from each other. His dad, a minister who was also into plants, nerd genes confirmed, had a garden that was like Carl's playground. Forget sandcastles, young Carl was all about those botanical life goals. Fast forward a few years, and Carl's in university trying to become a doctor. But surprise, surprise, while studying medicine, he's still laser focused on plants. Honestly, you'd think the guy was in a relationship with them, so he ends up attending both the University of Lund and Uppsala University, but let's be real, he was just looking for more plants to obsess over. If there was a plant anywhere within walking distance, Carl was on it like a kid on candy. By the time he was in his 20s, Linnaeus was already thinking, why is nature so messy? Let's get organized. And that's when he cooked up his big plan, his magnum opus, the Systema Naturae. Basically, he looked at the chaos of the natural world and said, you know what, I'm going to sort this out. So he created this whole classification system that would make even the most obsessive-compulsive person feel inadequate, and everything was neatly placed into categories like kingdoms, classes, orders, genera, and species. Think of it like a nature-themed version of Marie Kondo's Park Joy method, except Carl made sure everything had a Latin name before it could join the party. The first version of Systema Naturae was kind of like a pamphlet. It had just a few pages. But Carl was just getting started. I know he wasn't going to let nature off that easy. So over the years, he kept expanding the book like it was the ultimate collector's edition, adding more and more species. By the time he was done, the book had grown into a monster of knowledge, with thousands of species all neatly categorized. If nature had a library, Linnaeus was its chief librarian. Now, if you've ever been forced to learn the scientific names of animals or plants, thanks biology class, you've got Carl Linnaeus to thank, or blame, depending on how much you like memorizing Latin. Linnaeus invented the system of binomial nomenclature, which is just a fancy way of saying that every species gets a two-part name. It's like first and last names, but for living things. Instead of saying that big cat with a mane, you call it Panthera leo and feel like a genius for knowing the Latin. It's kind of like giving every living thing an official name tag at some global science convention. Before Linnaeus came along, naming species was chaos. Scientists would call the same species by different names, and some names were ridiculously long, like full-on descriptive sentences in Latin. Linnaeus looked at that mess and said, we need to fix this, and bam, he simplified it down to two names, genus and species. Easy, right? Well, easier than before, but let's be real, it still meant a lot of people had to learn Latin, which was probably his secret way of getting back at the world for not appreciating plants as much as he did. And by the time Linnaeus got a taste of fame, he was basically the Leonardo DiCaprio of taxonomy. He ended up getting all kinds of accolades, including being knighted by the Swedish king and being elected to prestigious societies like the Royal Society in London. But he didn't stop there. He started teaching at the University of Uppsala, where he recruited a bunch of eager students and turned them into his own personal army of plant and animal collectors. Linnaeus' students were like his science minions, running around the world collecting specimens from far-off places. These students would bring back exotic plants and animals, and Carl would happily slap a Latin name on them and add them to his ever-growing catalogue. Imagine being a student of Linnaeus, knowing that your future involved traveling to places you'd never heard of, or to bring back a weird-looking plant for your professor to name. Fun, right? Well, unless you were the unlucky one who got sent to some mosquito-infested jungle. But hey, all in the name of science. Linnaeus didn't just leave behind a bunch of old books and dried-up plant specimens. He left behind a legacy that still messes with students' heads today. His system of naming and classifying species became the foundation for modern taxonomy, and scientists still use it to this day. That means every time you're stuck trying to remember if Homo sapiens is the scientific name for humans or if Canis lupus means wolf. It does. So Carl Linnaeus wasn't just some random old guy who liked plants. He was the original nature nerd, the kind of guy who'd spend his Friday nights categorizing species instead of going out. He took his love for order and turned it into a system that scientists still use today. Sure, he made life harder for anyone who had to learn those Latin names, but in the end, he made it possible for scientists around the world to talk about living things in a universal language.
Okay, Timmy, that's enough for today. I'm really impressed with your presentation. For your next assignment, I'd like you to prepare another presentation about someone the class will choose. All right, everyone, see you next week.